Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm here. I'm Amy Ham. I'm here with Angelo Isidoro. We are with the Post Millennial, and we did a video about a week ago about this trucker convoy, the Freedom Convoy in Canada, that is getting international attention. It has only grown since then. When we last spoke to you, it was kind of in its infancy. So much has happened since then. So we have a lot to cover in a small amount of time, and we will do our best. It's like, where do you even begin? There are so many things. There's the funding through GoFundMe. There is the slandering and defamation of the people who are organizing this protest. We now have seen copycat protests around the world. We are seeing military intervention at the Canada-US border. It goes on and on. And I think last time Angelo and I also spoke about whether we felt pessimistic or optimistic about what's going on. So maybe we will kind of debrief about everything and then say where we're sitting at the end.
So how are you feeling? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? I mean, last time I was optimistic, you were a little bit skeptical. Given what's transpired over the past week, I mean, they're saying it has nothing to do with the truckers, but Prince Edward Island, Alberta, Saskatchewan getting rid of the vaccine passport, Ontario now saying they're going to get rid of it soon, Quebec dropping restrictions. There's a lot happening. So what's your take? What's your vibe?
I think that the protests have been effective because we are actually seeing changes happen with governments. But I also worry because I'm seeing how much vitriol there is, which I think is mostly led by mainstream media being extremely biased and not reporting fairly or accurately on what's going on. But I do see that a lot of Canadians are getting angry at the protesters and they're frustrated that they're still there and they're sort of sympathetic to Trudeau's message that they're being that they're engaging in an illegal activity. But at the same time, you look at Trudeau's approval rating, it's at an all-time low. It's as bad as Brian Mulroney.
Yeah.
Who I think was in like prime minister from like the 80s to the 90s. Like Trudeau is done. I said earlier, I'm like, this goose is cooked. He's out. He has not managed this well at all. He has totally gaffed. You know, he ignored the protest for a week, and now you have people saying there's an insurrection, which I think is ridiculous. But they're like, okay, the capital has been taken over by protesters, and we have a prime minister who ignored it. And then when he finally addressed it, all he did was inflame things and incite more divisiveness about the issue. And it seems like a huge mess to me. So I still feel pessimistic, but I know there's this flip side where most Canadians want mandates lifted. And I think that maybe these protests will be successful in making this idea happen. But I think that a lot of people are not, they're not ready for this kind of protest. And they're mad at Trudeau, they're mad at the truckers. It's just a big mess.
So here's what I'll give you, because you said Trudeau's done, Trudeau's cooked. This is where I'm a little more pessimistic, because I've heard people say, Trudeau's done, he's done, he's done. Something happens, whether it's blackface, SNC Lavalin, scandal after scandal. This guy's done, he's cooked, he's out, and then he wins again. So we can't discount the fact that the guy is Teflon. That being said, a new Morrow poll shows that I think only 16% of Canadians think he's done a good job. The majority of Canadians think he has handled it poorly in the sense that he's defamed millions of Canadians, and his inaction has made him look incredibly weak. Not only did he allegedly have COVID, but let's give him that. Let's say he had COVID for a week, right?
Allegedly had
Allegedly,
COVID. Yeah.
right? But let's give it to him, and let's say he had COVID for a week. He comes back, slanders the entire movement, and then goes on a ski trip, which is where he currently is at the time of this recording, is that he's off at a ski trip. So Yeah, his approvals are as bad as Brian Mulroney's. You have to remember Mulroney towards the end. I mean, after him, we were in a position where the Conservatives came out of an election with Kim Campbell with something like 2 seats in the legislature in the House. So you can't
Yeah.
really get any worse than that. And the fact that he's on vacation tells me that he clearly doesn't give a shit anymore. And either he doesn't give a shit
Yeah.
because he's going to retire, or he just feels that he could basically do anything and get reelected at this point. I don't know what you think.
Maybe he is in the grips of some kind of delusional narcissism, because even his snap election last year, I thought I didn't expect the honestly, like, I was wrong. I didn't expect that he would win a stronger minority than he had in the previous election. So I don't know, maybe he's just in the grips of delusion and he thinks that he will always be more popular than he actually is.
Yeah, well, I think it's entirely possible. That being said, my optimism goes back to the fact that whatever these people are doing is clearly working, right? In getting their point across. But something I wanted to talk about is about the blockades themselves. If we look at what's happening in Ottawa, yes, these truckers
Yeah.
have basically blocked a ton of roads, but I know they've intentionally left a lane open for emergency vehicles. What they're
Yeah.
doing with these borders, where you have these bridges that connect to the US, I think to Michigan State, where they're blocking international borders. You know, I've seen people say that it's kind of rich that conservatives are cheering the movement on when so many conservatives are against Extinction Rebellion or BLM, or these other activist groups that block roads or block pipelines. Isn't it sort of two-faced to say that you're okay with this, but you're not okay with that? So, like, what is your position on blocking the road, for lack of a better word or some term?
I mean, it's telling. They have explicitly said they will not block emergency vehicles. And if you also look at downtown Ottawa, you people are saying crime is at an all-time low. So it's it's a tricky situation. And when if you look at like the BLM protests, Canada got nowhere near as crazy as the United States did, where they had like Chaz and there were actual like violent crimes. Well, Canada had church fires later on, but I don't know. I feel like people are being hypocritical and they're being overly judgmental about the Convoy protests. They don't have a lot of sympathy for what they regard as people who are right wingers, and I don't even think that these are all right wing people. It's tied into the fact that you have this movement that was started by a few people that have a history of having ideas that are not easily digestible by mainstream Canadians. And they're trying to kind of look back and say, like, look, these three people are organizing this convoy and they had these terrible ideas. And it's like, so you think that thousands of people have shown up and they're being tricked into being Islamophobes or like Western separatists. But it's like, this is the working class and they're here and they're protesting about this one idea, and the kind of like extremist ideas of who may or may not be leading the protest, because at this point it's international. Several countries are doing this. I don't even think the few people that claim to be organizing this are really in charge anymore. It's just, it's out of control. At this point, I think it's like, this is about basic principles about freedom and mandates, and that's it. And I
Yeah.
don't know. Do you know what I'm getting at? It's like, it's
Yeah,
just,
yeah, I do. Well, there's a smoke screen. I mean, we know the organizers. I know one of the organizers because I interviewed him, Benjamin Dichter. I interviewed him on this channel. I interviewed him on my podcast. But you're right, there are other bad actors. You know,
And he brought up, like, he's like, I'm being called a white supremacist, and I am a Jewish man who has,
yeah.
I think his family had, in his family history, he had family members who died in the Holocaust.
Yeah, I mean, it gets ridiculous, right? But they're not going to show him. I mean, conservative media will amplify someone like him because he's well spoken and he is one of the organizers. But mainstream media is
Mm-hmm.
always going to go to the QAnon queen, Romana, or whatever her name is, that is some self proclaimed queen of Canada, or this other guy, Patrick King, who's like just like these, just they find crazy people without without implementing the nuance that in any group of 10,000, if I get 10,000 random people off the street, I guarantee some of them are going to be nuts. And that's
Yeah.
unfortunately part and parcel of the mainstream media and what they're trying to accomplish. But I think it's beyond their reach. I think this has
Mm-hmm.
gotten to a point now where people are becoming more and more sympathetic because we're seeing these videos. I mean, we have reporters there of bouncy castles and veterans, and I saw truckers that brought a hot tub with them, and they were like in a jacuzzi in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of the truck pro. So this is clearly a cry for freedom, a push for freedom, and
Yeah.
it's getting international attention. Like I want to talk about the fact that even Bill Maher the other night slammed
Mm-hmm.
Trudeau. He totally slammed Trudeau on his panel. His whole show was about the trucker convoy, and he talked
He
about the
did,
fact
yeah.
that this is something bigger. It's not just about the mandate for the truckers. It's about this
Mm-hmm.
notion that not all of us got to sit in a cottage working on a MacBook for 2 years and basically
Yeah.
getting free money from the government, right?
Yeah.
And I stole that line
Yeah.
from a Liberal MP who's now dissenting against Trudeau. Like that's the truth of it. Is you have sort of this
Mm-hmm.
upper class bourgeoisie,
Yeah.
elitism in Ottawa, and you have these people where it doesn't really matter to them whether the world is locked down or not because they're white collar, they
Yeah.
can work from home. But for the rest of society, and for most of society that keeps food on our tables,
Mm-hmm.
life has been pretty terrible for the past 2 years.
Yeah.
And it
And
doesn't have to be.
the lockdown measures and the mandates have very real impacts on them.
Yeah.
Like you're not, if you're an academic working at a university and you have to work on Zoom for 2 years and you're really sick of Zoom meetings, like that's I feel bad for you, but that's nowhere near as tragic as a the thousands of truckers in Canada who are now essentially not able to work because they can't cross the border. And I people will just say, well, this is, I mean, 90% of truckers are double vaccinated. And it's like, okay, sure, but it's complicated when you look at the reasons that people don't get vaccinated. And a lot of these people aren't anti-vaxxers. And, a lot of the medical exemptions for getting vaccinated, they're very difficult to achieve. And I just, yeah, it's all oversimplified. And I think what I'm getting at is that I'm still pessimistic. I still feel as though a lot of Canadians are being really harsh and they're frustrated. They're buying into the mainstream media narrative about the blockades, that they're being led by extremists, even though it's like, you brought up Pat King, but how is I don't even think he's related to the organize, like he's very on the peripheral. And the main organizers, like including Ben, who you spoke to, they're doing this because they believe in the Canadian Charter and they have principles, and it is not related to their other views, whether or not other people agree with them about these views. And I've seen like journalist John Kay brought up on Twitter today, when the BLM protests were happening throughout North America, there were a lot of people who joined in knowing that the organizers of BLM were super anti-capitalist, and they talked about like dissolving the family unit, lots of batshit crazy ideas, and they don't buy into that, but they're there because of the principle that the protest was based on. And it's the same thing. It's like, this is about charter rights. This is about freedoms, freedom of movement, freedom of association. It's it's not appropriate to smear these thousands of Canadians who are here and call them white supremacists, because they're obviously not.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up the other side to it, and let's bring that up. You know, there's been these massive climate protests over the years. Climate, you don't really see these happen anymore because like there's like more serious problems basically. Um,
Yeah.
but you remember like 2018, 2019, you'd have when Greta was here, you'd have these massive protests. And you know that at the head of these climate organizations, there's always this mantra of like destroying capitalism, or it always leads back to some kind of cultural Marxist mantra. But I'd say a
Yeah.
lot of the people that go to that are just your suburban families that want to feel good about themselves and they bring a sign and they care about climate
Yeah.
change. They don't necessarily subscribe to that mantra. But in this case, I
Yeah.
mean, the core mantra of this movement is just freedom. And the reality is that there are people who will lie and say they're part of an organization just to get more attention. But that's not what's happening. So I think it's important to focus and write stories about what's really happening and to see, you know, when the government reaches out to coordinate with these people. And that's what I think should happen is Trudeau should reach out and
Yeah.
figure this out and end it. I think it should be perfectly clear that the organizers and the truckers involved just want this to end as much as Trudeau does. Like they don't want to be there.
Yeah.
You think they want to be there in 20 below weather? You know, maybe
Yeah.
the guys in the hot tub, but everyone else like does not want to be there, right? They want to get back to their lives. They want to get back to what you took from them. The only people that want
Yeah.
to be there really are the provocateurs. So, I mean, do you think there's any chance that, like, how does this end?
I'm not entirely sure. I know we've seen it's going on right now. It's kind of live where at the Windsor Detroit border, they have deployed the military, and it's tense. We're seeing like ex-military people standing in between the deployed military and the protesters. I feel anxious about it. Maybe this is part of my ongoing pessimism. I'm not sure how it's going to go down. I'm not sure what the outcome will be, and I feel quite nervous. I don't want anything violent to happen. I don't think it has to go that way, and I'm just really hoping that it doesn't. And in terms of Ottawa, very different situation. Like, obviously, they're in the capital, but it's quite different than being at like a major border crossing where billions of dollars of goods are crossing over the border every year. So I understand why the military was deployed there first before being kind of deployed in Ottawa. But I'm not sure how it will end. And I'm just a little bit, I'm honestly afraid right now. I don't know what will happen. The only things I feel certain of are that Canadians are really angry with Trudeau. They're done with him because he hasn't handled this well at all. He hasn't been a leader. He just disappeared. And then when he did show up, he was incredibly divisive and he threw gas on the fire. And, it's like at this point, it's gone on for so long that he's being called out by multiple MPs in his own party. And the opposition is like, we need to do something. I think Trudeau's done. And the mandates will likely be done, whether or not it was a direct result of the protests or because Canada will follow suit from other countries in the world. I'm not sure, but I'm not that optimistic about the fact that Canadians, I don't think they've received these protests very well. And possibly in large part because of mainstream media bias in covering these issues, which maybe you can speak about. I think you saw the man today that he was removing snow from the steps of, of like the memorial in
Yeah,
Ottawa, and a
the
CBC
veteran.
reporter approached him.
Yeah, well, we were reporting for those who don't know. Effectively, last night, the barricades which were put up around the War Memorial in Ottawa were taken down by the truckers, and we sent our reporter to figure out why. We interviewed a number of veterans, and we interviewed one in particular. I believe his name was Jake, who said, "Look, we're taking care of our memorial. We're paying respects to our fallen." And he was clearing off the snow and polishing the marble and everything. And CBC walked up to try and interview him, and this guy just went off. I can't do it any justice, so maybe Mr. Editor Grant, show a quick clip of that here.
Yeah.
Get out of here! Get out of here! You're just as responsible for all this garbage as they are. Now leave, bud. Leave! I don't want to listen to anything you say. Quite obviously, move! You fucking embarrassment! How do you sleep at night, bud? You sleep really good or what? Don't worry, we're gonna come defund you next! Who are they with? Fucking CBC!
So basically, it was very interesting as independent media. We went up to veterans who said, "Who are you with? Who are you with?" And we say Post Millennial, and they say, "Okay, good. Like I respect independent media." That just goes to show, the trust that people have in journalists has diminished so significantly, which I know sounds like a good thing, but really for a democracy, it's not a good thing. It's sort of a tragic thing that basically we can't really trust anything we hear. And it's unfortunate to see that happen. But at the same time, people are done with bullshit. Like I've seen these videos where a lot of these legacy reporters put out and say, "Look how I was harassed and I had to take the CTV sticker off the van, and such a sad moment for democracy," and this and that. It's like, okay, well, like your instinct is to say, yeah, you shouldn't be yelled at when you're trying to do your job. I get that.
Of course.
But at the other side of it, you have to understand that you are part of a larger institution that has greatly damaged democracy and our understanding and our common truth. You have actively led the effort to divide people against each other and make people hate each other. So it's understandable to some degree why someone would get mad. Obviously, don't condone violence or anything like that. But someone, giving you the middle finger and saying you suck or sending a mean email, trust me, I've gotten mean emails. A lot of that is just part and parcel of being on the internet. And I'm sure you've gotten a ton of hate mail as well, Amy. It's not, it's a terrible thing, but it's the cold, dark reality of living in the world in 2022, a world that is so divisive in part because of that legacy media. So I'm very sympathetic to people getting yelled at, but at the same time, it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And, when legacy media tries to turn this into the entire story about they're so hard done by, suddenly, it's just incredibly pathetic because they have been the mouthpiece of Trudeau's government for years. And suddenly they're getting some backlash and they feel really sad about it. And they want to turn that into a story and act as though they're oppressed, which I don't have sympathy for them. And I don't think a lot of average Canadians do, which is good. So maybe that's one thing I'm optimistic about.
Well, they're very privileged, right? Like it didn't used to be this way. Like when it comes to journalism, I look to someone like Gareth Jones, who snuck into the Ukraine during the Soviet Union and uncovered the Holodomor, right? And he came home and was controversial. Even the New York Times attacked him because the New York Times was bought off by the Soviet Union. Journalists used to actually do journalism. And they weren't these well-off, upper-class, rich kids that went to journalism school and then their uncle is an editor somewhere and they get in. Like, this is the thing, is that a lot of these so-called journalists have never held a hammer in their life. So it's unfortunate that they're part of that class now. But the clip of CTV yelling and trying to get into the elevator to get to the press conference with the Convoy organizers, and just seeing the doors close with our reporter in it, but seeing the doors close is, I can't even describe how amazing it is.
It was. Yeah, this is what independent media has been dealing with for so long and still deals with. I think even a couple days ago, there was a presser with Trudeau, and there was like a rebel reporter there, and Trudeau was like, "No, I'm not answering your question." So, you know, for the very first time that this has happened, where legacy media really wants the story and the subjects are like, no, you're propagandists, I'm not going to speak to you. And then they just turn into enormous crybabies and write stories about how horrible and oppressed they are and try to make the story about them is just, it makes me laugh, but at the same time, it's very sad.
Yeah, it is. And the tide is turning. People are losing trust. And I nonetheless remain optimistic. You're right. When it comes to the blockades, if I'm being completely frank, I don't know how I feel about blocking borders. I part of me, I get bothered by it because I think it sets a bad precedent. And I think if leftists were doing that, we'd all be freaking out about it. So I'm a little bit perturbed by that. But when it comes to Ottawa, I think Trudeau has painted himself in a corner because now the rest of the world is opening up anyhow. So if he wants to go open up the world just because COVID is over, it'll look like capitulation. But then if he stays closed, he looks insane because the rest of the world is done with this thing. So this is what happens when you slander like the entire country because of your own narcissism. It's just a crazy position to be in. I'm curious to see what comes next. And
it is really now. It's about like his ego versus reason, and the protest happened kind of at the 11th hour, and he is really in this spot where no matter what he does, people will interpret it as him capitulating or him doing something based on science. And he's not going to win either way, but the longer that he just just go on more ski trips. He's shown that he has no problem going on vacations on important days for a country. He did that on our Truth and Reconciliation Day. He's doing that now. I don't know. Like he's not going to win either way. He has to, I hope, recognize that his approval rating is at absolutely an all-time low. And just let us have our charter protected freedoms back, please. Like, this is what makes the most sense. I just hope he does that. But I don't know. He's, as you said, he's a massive narcissist.
Well, we'll find out next week. We'll keep doing this.
Yeah. I know the first video we did seemed like it was like just talking about funny things that happened. And then in the span of a week, it was like, wow, the Ontario government has allowed the courts to prevent money from going from a donation site to the Convoy. And now there are 4 U.S. states investigating GoFundMe for refusing to release this money. It's just blown up in such a huge way. And I don't think Canada has ever had this much international attention.
No, not at all. Which is why I think in part we're doing this, right? Because I think right now we're living in something historic. We're witnessing something historic. So I think it's important to document that. Obviously, we're documenting footage, but we want to document our commentary. And obviously, if you guys like that, the last video did pretty well. We'll keep doing it and keep on rocking and rolling.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Send us your feedback and like also say what you want us to talk about. Cause we just, I don't know. We just have a conversation and go into whatever. So if there's something specific you want us to get into, let us know and we can definitely do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's been swell. Who knows? I'm nervous. If we're meeting a week from now, I'm very nervous about what will happen. I don't want violence But honestly, I'm leaving on a note of pessimism where I'm saying I'm scared. I'm worried that violence or something terrible will happen. I don't want it to, but that's what I'm worried about.
Well, we'll see if you get validated. I hope not, but I hope not. I'll leave it there. I hope not. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Angelo, the eternal optimist.
Really not. I'm pretty pessimistic. I'm just optimistic about this. I've been pessimistic for 2 years. So my optimism is about 2 weeks old.
Okay.
All right.
Baby
Until next
optimism.
time, folks.
Okay, thank you for tuning in.